For 22 years, our marriage was a fortress, unshakable and strong, or so I thought. But as the cracks began to form, a hidden darkness took hold, threatening to consume everything I had built. It all started with a whisper, an unsettling suspicion, and ended in a way I never could have imagined, with blood on my hands. After 22 years of marriage, my wife and I had settled into a routine. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I believed that we were solid, that nothing could come between us. I never imagined that my own cousin, someone I had grown up with, could be the one to destroy everything. It started subtly. My wife, who had always been open and honest with me, became distant. She spent more time on her phone, often smiling at messages she wouldn't let me see. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just her way of coping with the stresses of life. But then late one night, I caught a glimpse of a message she quickly tried to hide. It was from my cousin, someone I considered a brother. My heart sank as the reality began to dawn on me. There was something going on between them. My suspicions grew as I noticed them exchanging glances during family gatherings, their conversations laced with a familiarity that went beyond mere friendship. I confronted my wife, but she dismissed my concerns, accusing me of being paranoid. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it festered, gnawing away at my trust in her. One day I decided to follow her. She told me she was going to visit a friend, but instead she drove to a secluded spot outside the city. There in the shadows, I watched as she met my cousin. They laughed, touched, and shared a kiss that shattered my world. I felt a burning rage inside me, but I stayed hidden, biding my time. When she came home that evening, I acted as if nothing was wrong, but inside I was plotting. I knew this betrayal couldn't go unpunished, but I didn't know yet how far I was willing to go. I spent sleepless nights thinking about their betrayal, imagining the worst possible scenarios. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I had to do something drastic. But revenge is a slow poison. As days turned into weeks, my anger grew, and I started planning. I didn't want a divorce. I wanted justice. I wanted to make them pay for their betrayal, but I needed to be careful. I needed to ensure that when the time came, I wouldn't just ruin their lives, I would end them. The days following my discovery were a blur of anger, confusion, and a growing sense of determination. I could no longer look at my wife without seeing the deceit in her eyes, the lies she spun to cover her betrayal. Every smile she gave, every touch she offered, felt like poison. But I knew I had to keep up appearances. I couldn't let her, or my cousin, know that I was on to them. My mind became a labyrinth of thoughts, each one darker than the last. I considered confronting them, exposing their affair to the family, but that would only lead to humiliation and a messy divorce. I wanted more than that. I wanted to see the fear in their eyes, to make them pay for the destruction they had wrought on my life. I started to distance myself emotionally from her. At first it was small things, staying out late, avoiding conversations, pretending to be engrossed in work. She noticed, of course. She asked if something was wrong, but I just brushed her off. I could see the unease in her eyes, but she never pushed too hard, perhaps afraid of what I might say. Meanwhile, I began gathering information, learning her routine, and understanding the dynamics of her relationship with my cousin. I began following them more closely. I knew where they met, how often, and for how long. Each meeting chipped away at my sanity. My cousin, who had always been close to me, was now the embodiment of everything I hated. He had no idea that I was watching, that I knew every move he made. The idea of murder began to take root in my mind like a twisted dark flower. At first, it was just a fleeting thought, something that seemed impossible, a step too far. But the more I considered it, the more it made sense. Divorce would leave me with nothing but a broken reputation. But murder would give me the justice I craved. It would be the ultimate revenge. I started planning meticulously. I knew I had to make it look like an accident or a crime of passion, something that wouldn't immediately point back to me. I began researching methods, reading true crime stories, and watching documentaries on unsolved murders. I studied my wife's habits, noting when she was alone, where she went, and how she moved through the house. I became obsessed with the idea of her death, picturing it in different ways, each more gruesome than the last. I also began to manipulate my cousin. Subtle comments, suggestions, and gestures slowly drove a wedge between us. I made him feel guilty, insecure, and paranoid, all while pretending to be the same loving cousin I had always been. I wanted him to suffer before he even realized what was happening. One evening, I tested my resolve. We were sitting in the living room, watching television. She was engrossed in a show, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of a kitchen knife hidden under the cushion. I had placed it there earlier, just to see if I could do it, if I could bring myself to end it all right there. My heart pounded as I slid my hand under the cushion, fingers brushing against the cold steel. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, the tension building as I imagined plunging the knife into her. But then she turned to me and smiled, a genuine, warm smile, the kind that had once melted my heart. For a moment I hesitated. Could I really do this? Could I kill the woman I had loved for over 2 decades? I let go of the knife, my hand trembling. Not yet, I told myself. Not like this. It had to be perfect. I couldn't afford any mistakes. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering what had stopped me. Was it some lingering affection, or was it fear? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I was too far gone to turn back now. The plan had to continue. I would wait for the right moment, and when it came, I wouldn't hesitate again. As the days passed, I intensified my efforts. I continued to gather information, making sure I knew every detail of their affair. I also started isolating her from our friends and family, subtly convincing them that she was losing her mind, that she was becoming unstable. It was all part of the plan, to make her seem unhinged, so that when she was gone, no one would question it too much. In my mind, I was already rehearsing the scene, how I would do it, how I would cover it up, and how I would walk away, free and clear. I was ready to cross the line, to step into the abyss. All I needed was the right moment, and when it came, I would be ready. The morning after the murders, I awoke to a chilling stillness in the house. The events of the previous night hung over me like a heavy fog, but there was no time to dwell on it. I had to put the final touches on my plan, ensuring that when the police arrived, everything would appear exactly as I wanted. I made the call to 911, my voice trembling with a practiced grief. I told them I had just returned home from a business trip to find my wife and cousin dead. I could barely get the words out, sounding like a man broken by loss and horror. The operator assured me that help was on the way, and I hung up, sinking into the chair in the living room, my mind racing with what needed to be done next. When the police arrived, I was ready. The officers swarmed the house, their faces grim as they took in the gruesome scene I had orchestrated. I played my part flawlessly, shocked, devastated, and utterly confused. I gave them the story I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. I had been out of town, returning home to find the front door ajar and my life in ruins. They asked me about my cousin, about his relationship with my wife, and I fed them half-truths and lies, weaving a narrative that would lead them away from me. I told them about his recent erratic behavior, his jealousy, and how he had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the tragedy. I could see the officers exchanging glances, already forming their theories. As the investigation began, I stayed in character, grieving, cooperative, and just the right amount of distraught. I attended the funerals, standing alone as the sole survivor of a tragedy that had supposedly torn my life apart. Friends and family gathered around, offering their condolences, but I barely heard them. My mind was elsewhere, focused on the next steps, on making sure there were no loose ends. The police questioned me several times over the following weeks, but I stuck to my story. They found no evidence to contradict it, and no reason to suspect me. Everything was going according to plan. I even managed to plant a few more seeds of doubt, subtly suggesting that my cousin had been troubled for some time, struggling with his mental health. It was enough to push the investigation in the direction I wanted. But as the weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to happen. The guilt I had managed to suppress started creeping in, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I found myself lying awake at night, haunted by visions of their faces, by the sounds of their last breaths. The satisfaction I had expected to feel never came. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness, a darkness that seemed to grow with each passing day. I tried to push it down, to focus on moving forward, but the weight of what I had done was inescapable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their blood-stained bodies, heard their final pleas. I began to unravel, bit by bit, losing the control I had once prided myself on. It was as if the very act of taking their lives had unleashed something inside me, something I could no longer contain. The final blow came in the form of a letter, one I found on my wife's nightstand as I was packing up her belongings. It was addressed to me, written in her familiar handwriting, and dated just a few days before her death. With trembling hands, I opened it, dreading what I might find. In the letter, she confessed everything: her affair with my cousin, her guilt, and her plan to end the relationship. She wrote about how she had made a terrible mistake, how she had been swept up in something she couldn't control, but had finally come to her senses. She wanted to make things right, to repair our marriage, to tell me the truth and beg for my forgiveness. She had planned to meet him that night to end things once and for all, to put the affair behind her and start fresh with me. My blood ran cold as I read her words, the realization sinking in like a knife to the gut. She had been trying to do the right thing, to make amends, and I had murdered her for it. The very act that I thought would bring me closure had instead destroyed the one chance we had at reconciliation. My hands shook as I folded the letter, my mind reeling from the implications. Everything I had done, every lie, every drop of blood I had spilled, was based on a misunderstanding, a monstrous miscalculation. The truth was far darker than I had ever imagined, and it was too late to take any of it back. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface now consumed me entirely, crushing me under its weight. I could no longer deny what I had become, a monster driven by rage and paranoia, blind to the truth until it was far too late. The police never suspected me, but that didn't matter anymore. The real punishment was the knowledge that I had killed the one person who had truly loved me. And for what? A twisted sense of justice that had no foundation in reality. I couldn't live with the truth, and so in the end, I made the only choice I had left. One final act to atone for the sins I could never escape. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where my wife and I had shared so many meals, so many memories, and wrote a letter of my own, a confession detailing everything I had done and the mistake that had led me down this dark path. As I finished the letter, I felt an eerie calm settle over me, the storm inside finally quieting. I knew what I had to do. I took the same knife I had used on them, placed it against my chest, and with one swift motion, ended it all. The next morning, the police found my body slumped over the kitchen table, my confession laid out before me. The case was closed, the story complete, but not in the way I had imagined. The truth had finally come to light, but it offered no solace, no redemption, only the cold, harsh reality of a life destroyed by its own hand. The story concludes with the protagonist's ultimate realization of his tragic mistake, leading to a final act of desperation. The darkness that consumed him is revealed to be self-inflicted, bringing the tale to a haunting and poignant end.